Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely unbelievable 400-year story. We're tracking exactly how a fractured, war-torn peninsula over in Europe somehow transformed into the first truly global titan in human history. To really get a grip on how this happened, we're going to build out a chronological timeline, tracking the massive turning points of their territorial expansion and, their ultimate collapse. It's a wild narrative full of ambition, literally mountains of wealth, and some pretty fatal miscalculations.
Let's kick things off with a totally staggering number. 5 million. That is the number of square miles Spain claimed at its absolute peak in the early 19th century. I mean, just try to wrap your head around that scale for a second. We're talking about a continuous stretch of land running practically the entire length of the Americas, from California all the way down to Argentina, and then stretching all the way across the Pacific Ocean to the Philippines. It's easily one of the most rapid and remarkable rises to power we've ever seen. So how exactly did they pull this off?
Section 1. The birth of a superpower. A fractured peninsula.
Okay, jumping into our timeline. Back in the late 15th century, Spain wasn't even Spain yet. It was just this chaotic patchwork of rival kingdoms. But that all changed in 1469. Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon tied the knot in a highly strategic dynastic marriage. This brought the two most powerful Christian kingdoms together and totally shifted the balance of power. Fast forward to 1491, they oust the last remaining Muslim faction at the fall of Granada, locking down their borders. And it was exactly that newly achieved internal stability that allowed them to do something kind of crazy in 1492. They finally agreed to fund a westward voyage proposed by a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus. He thought he was heading to Asia, but, as we know, accidentally stumbled onto a completely unknown continent.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Europe handled this massive discovery. By 1494, Spain and Portugal literally just sliced the globe in half with the Treaty of Tordesillas. Brokered by Pope Alexander VI, it basically drew a line right down the map, handing the newly discovered Americas, except for Brazil eventually, straight to Spain. This one single agreement totally set the stage for Spain's unchecked expansion into the New World, completely free from the interference of their European neighbors.
Section 2. Conquering the Americas. Aggressive expansions.
So, with the legal groundwork officially laid out, the Spanish made a devastating push onto the mainland. And it's really interesting to contrast the two biggest campaigns here. First, you've got Hernán Cortés taking on the Aztecs in modern-day Mexico. Because the Aztec Empire was highly centralized, Cortés managed to capture their leader, Montezuma. And even though a violent uprising temporarily drove the Spanish out, that central authority collapsed pretty swiftly by 1521. Now, contrast that with Francisco Pizarro's campaign against the Incas in the Andes Mountains. Totally different story. The Inca Empire was decentralized and spread out over incredibly rough terrain. That resulted in a grueling, prolonged war lasting well into the 1570s, which was made even messier by a quasi-civil war breaking out between Pizarro and his own fellow conquistadors.
But underneath all those military tactics, there is a much darker reality. The crucial takeaway here is that European diseases inadvertently did way more to topple these highly advanced civilizations than any steel armor or weaponry ever could. The Spanish, without even knowing it, brought smallpox across the ocean. Because the native populations have absolutely zero natural immunity, millions died. This invisible weapon just decimated populations before the major battles were even fought, which massively weakened their resistance and essentially paved the way for Spanish dominance.
Section 3. The first global economy. Immense global funding.
Now, to fund this massive new global administration, the Spanish obviously needed wealth, and they found it right in the earth. Check out this number, 80%. Following their conquests, the Spanish essentially hit the jackpot when they discovered a literal mountain of silver at Potosi in Bolivia. Using forced native labor, this one single site churned out 80% of the entire world silver supply for the next 2 centuries. They load all this bullion onto these massive annual treasure fleets and ship it right back across the Atlantic. It was an unprecedented transfer of global wealth.
But here is where our timeline takes a massive, unexpected turn. You'd think digging up mountains of silver would be great, right? while shipping it all back to Spain actually backfired on them economically. This insane influx of treasure triggered what's known as the price revolution. Essentially, Spain flooded its own markets and the rest of Europe with so much precious metal that the value of money itself just plummeted. It caused massive global inflation. So they were incredibly wealthy on paper, but their actual real-world purchasing power was falling apart.
Right alongside that economic turmoil, a super-rigid social hierarchy was taking shape over in the colonies. At the very top, you had the peninsulares. These were administrators who were actually born in Spain. Right below them were the Creoles, people of full Spanish descent but who were born in the Americas. And then the mestizos, folks of mixed Spanish and native ancestry. Now keep this in mind because the growing friction and resentment between these classes, especially the Creoles and mestizos feeling like they should be governing themselves instead of answering to the peninsulares, is going to be the ultimate undoing of this empire.
Section 4. Stagnation and decline. Hitting a hard wall.
So, by the 17th century, this seemingly invincible Spanish expansion finally hits a hard, immovable wall. The red flags of stagnation were everywhere. Remember those endless silver supplies from places like Potosi? Well, they were finally drying up. And incredibly, despite all those treasure fleets, the Spanish government was blowing so much cash on endless wars back in Europe that King Philip II literally had to declare bankruptcy 4 separate times. Plus, on top of that poor governance, rival powers like the English, French, and Dutch started sniffing around and picking off territories Spain had claimed but neglected, like when England just wrestled away control of Jamaica in 1660. The giant was bleeding.
Section 5. The ultimate collapse. The dramatic final act. Now for the dramatic final act. And surprisingly, it wasn't sparked by a colonial rebellion, but by a dictator back in Europe. By 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte had decided to take direct control over Spain and install his brother Joseph as its king. This is a massive turning point for our timeline. When France occupied Spain and messed with the legitimate throne, it created this huge power vacuum. Those frustrated Creoles and mestizos we were just talking about, they finally saw their window. They felt zero loyalty to a Spanish throne controlled by the French, and that completely opened the floodgates for self-rule.
Just watch how fast the dominoes fall here. Between 1808 and 1810, wars of independence just erupt everywhere. Despite the Royalists fighting back, brilliant leaders like Simon Bolivar and José de San Martin led a sweeping wave of liberation across the continent. Argentina declares independence in 1816, Gran Colombia is set up by 1819, Mexico breaks away in 1821, and Peru is officially liberated by 1824. In less than 20 years, the vast majority of that jaw-dropping 5 million square mile empire simply vanished from Spanish control.
So what was left? Really, just a severely humbled nation. For the rest of the 19th century, a vastly reduced Spain jealously guarded its final few territories: Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines over in the Pacific. To them, these islands were the very last vestiges of their national greatness. But back home, Spain was plagued by endless political instability, and pretty soon, these remaining colonies were completely engulfed in guerrilla warfare and their own insurrections.
Which brings our entire narrative full circle. On one end of our timeline, we have 1492, a total chance discovery by a sailor that kicks off an unprecedented 400-year global empire. And on the exact opposite end, 1898, the Cuban War of Independence eventually draws in U.S. intervention, and the resulting Spanish-American War was a remarkably brief conflict. Spain was soundly defeated and forced to permanently hand over Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Just like that, the world's first superpower was officially dissolved.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to chew on. After 400 years of global dominance stretching across 5 million square miles, extracting literal mountains of silver, and entirely redrawing the map of the planet, what is the most lasting cultural and linguistic legacy of the world's first global superpower? I mean, think about the languages spoken across the Americas today, the borders that are still in place, and how the echoes of this fallen giant continue to profoundly shape the world we live in right now. It's wild to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey today, and keep asking questions.